Good evening, everyone. It's me again. I get to talk again, huh? It's twice in one day. All right. Hope everybody had a good afternoon. We'll talk about the lesson that we talked about this morning, focusing on Peter. His first walk on water, then his second walk on water. He got several discussion items I'd like to bring up. And just get some opinions. As I said this morning, this story applies directly to me in a lot of ways, and that's one of the reasons that I picked this subject to talk about, because I've had my own struggles, as I'm sure a lot of us have. In this slide up here, in summary, I guess, his first walk on water was his struggle, and his second walk on water was his victory. So let's get into it a little bit further, if I can get it to advance. Let's point it the right way and see. That's all it took. It's just to point it to it. Just to point it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Again, in summary, Peter's first doubt: Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water. We'll get into it a little bit more here shortly. Peter's second doubt, when he actually walked on the water, but he fell in and sank. Okay. The text was Matthew 14, verse 22 through 32. As we talked about this morning, it had been a long day, right? John the Baptist had been beheaded, so you can imagine their emotional state. And also Jesus had fed the 5,000. So the disciples had rowed the boat for 3+ miles, and they saw someone walking on the water toward them sometime between 3 and 6 a.m. So, if you just think about that from a practical standpoint in today's time, they've got to be exhausted, for one thing, right? A very emotional day. They're exhausted, and they actually row the boat for 3+ miles. So they see someone walking towards them on the water. All right. First of all, why were they terrified when they saw Jesus? First of all, they didn't know it was Jesus, right? So why were they terrified? Hold on.
Who wouldn't be?
JW says, who wouldn't be? Very good answer.
Not a normal thing to see.
Not a normal thing to see. We got some fishermen in here I know 3 of them that I kind of referenced this morning. 2 of them are here, Gary and Glenn. So what? And we've got other people like to fish. So what if you guys were out on the boat at night and you see somebody walking towards you? What are you going to think?
For one thing, 3 to 6 is still kind of dark.
Exactly. It's dark.
And you can't really.
And
how many could see anything at a distance is hard to.
right. And they didn't have flashlights, did they? I don't think flashlights had quite been invented yet. So they didn't have those. Might have a little bit of moonlight, maybe. Again, some of this is speculation, correct? So why were they terrified? Obviously, for obvious reasons. You're out in the boat, you see somebody walking to you, hey, it's going to scare me. All right, let's go to the next point. Why was Peter the only one to venture out? When I say venture out, you got the other disciples in the boat, right? What was Peter hoping to gain? So you've got the other ones, they're all scared, right? They're all scared. They think they saw a ghost. They think they've seen a ghost. But why was Peter the only one to venture out? Why was Peter the only one to dare to leave the boat, like we talked about this morning? That's Peter for you. You hear what he said? That's Peter for you. Explain what you mean, JW.
He was somewhat impetuous. He spoke up at times when no one else did.
He did?
It wasn't always for the better. Sometimes.
True.
And when he denied Jesus 3 times yet, he was speaking out, but out of turn. So he seemed to be more of an impulsive type person than personality.
Impulsive is a good description of him. He really is. Really was. Other thoughts? Why was he the only one to venture out?
He was the person that was on the water a lot.
Okay. All right. Peter
More
was
to experience.
Peter was a fisherman, wasn't he? So he was on the water a lot. Very good. Let's turn this, yeah,
Somebody's got to be first.
let's do it.
Chances are, there could have been another one, I tell you, would have been there, but he was first.
That's a good point, Gary. I don't even heard what Gary said. Somebody had to be first. So if it wasn't him, maybe one of the other ones would have stepped out. You know, again, that's speculation, we just don't know. But Peter was the first. All right, let's turn it around. Why were the other disciples not in such a hurry to go out as Peter did? Mike?
Well, I think Peter was kind of mouthpiece with the whole bunch.
Okay.
And he said right here, if it is you, bid me to come out. So he wasn't quite sure yet.
He still wasn't sure.
Wasn't quite sure. So the Lord tells him, come on out.
All right, that's a
He
good
got out
point.
on the water and things kind of went the other way with it.
True, exactly. Exactly. Good. Good. Other thoughts? Okay, so Peter was the first one. We've established that. Peter was the only one to venture out. Those are my words. What was he hoping to gain when he walked on the water? Because think about it. I mean, he's taking a chance, right? He's taking a big chance. The wind was blowing. We're going to get to that part here in a minute, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But the wind was blowing, thinking it's a stormy night maybe. So, I mean, wind and storms kind of go together in some respect. So what was he hoping to gain, though? Say that again?
Assurance.
Assurance. Okay.
If you really-
Assurance of what?
If you really are who you say you are, you can create, cause me to be able to be on the water with you.
Okay. Y'all hear what she said? Assurance that it's Jesus. And he could go on the water with him. Good. Other thoughts? What was he hoping to gain? Or another way to put it, what were his intentions? Put it that way. Because he had, I mean, if you think about it, from just a practical, general standpoint, he really had more to lose. Again, this is from a human mind standpoint. So I think that goes back to what Doris was saying even more. If it's just if we just take part of that out of the picture, so Peter had more to lose, right? I mean, he was willing to take the risk involved in order to be able to get that assurance that Doris was talking about. That's a thought. Others? Yes, sir.
He wanted to be with the Lord for several reasons, perhaps. One, safety, as mentioned. He knew that Jesus had the power, and the water was a little rough.
Right.
And he knew that with him he'd be safe. And there might have been a touch of pride there. I ought to be out there first with him.
Good point. Good point. So I think he answered that question very well right there. What was he hoping to gain? He was hoping to gain Jesus, right? I mean, hey, he's there. I've got a chance to go, there's Jesus. Hey, here's my chance, right? Although there's risk in doing that. I mean, from our mind, from our human nature standpoint, there's water there. Jesus is, we don't know how far he was, or some of y'all correct me if I'm wrong. We don't know how far he was from the boat, do we? Is that something I missed in my studies?
In the Mark account, Mark just adds this, I've never noticed it before, but he said Christ was trying to pass him up and go ahead without being noticed. I don't know why that's added.
Interesting.
It is interesting.
That is. And if you think
He
about,
wasn't,
oh, that's,
Christ didn't intend to be noticed, was the point that Mark was making.
That's
I-
not a good way to go unnoticed.
well, no. If you go walking on the water, I mean, it's a pretty good way to get noticed, right? Pretty good way. Interesting. And I don't, see, that's something that went over my head. Adam.
We forget about the size of Lake Gennesaret.
Yeah.
It's a large lake.
It is large, yeah.
So it's easy to pass by a small boat on the lake. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, when Peter asked, he didn't say visit, he said, give me, grant me permission to come out to you.
Right.
Not just go out to his own.
Right.
So, give me permission to come out to you. Peter, then he gets up. What was Peter hoping to gain? He's the oldest of all the disciples. Everybody looks to him.
Right.
So who would you expect to be the first to stand up? But not necessarily get out of the boat and get to the water. You know, that's something,
Right.
something you don't do. But it was a challenge of faith at that moment for him. Let me come to you, Lord.
Right. And that kind of goes back to what Gary was saying. Somebody had to be first. Well, it was Peter, and Peter does have that that characteristic about his personality too.
And
Thomas.
he did have faith, because he did walk on the water at first.
Mm-hmm. Right. We can get to that. Did you say he did or did not?
He did.
Okay. Right.
He did actually walk on the water. And
Right. So he had he had the initial faith.
away and started to sink.
Right. He had the initial faith, and then he lost it.
Right.
Right. Whenever he started to sink.
As long as he kept his eyes on the Lord, he was able to walk on the water.
Amen.
Keep his eyes off the Lord and look at the storm.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the key right there to the whole lesson. Everybody hear what Bob said? Everybody hear what Bob said? He said, no. Bob, would you repeat that a little bit louder, please?
Certainly.
Let me give you your microphone.
As long as Peter kept his eyes on the Lord, he was able to walk on the water. But when he took his eyes off the Lord and looked at the storm, he sank.
Right. Keep your eyes on Jesus and you won't sink. But if you take your eyes off Jesus onto the wind or whatever other obstacle is there, that's when you sink. I think. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Very good. Good stuff. Other thoughts on that question? Why was Peter the only one to venture out? What was he hoping to gain?
So, you open up by saying what type of day they all had.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they were well aware of what Christ was able to do and perform at that time. So,
True.
seeing someone walk on the water, anybody in common sense at the time has never seen anybody walk on the water.
Exactly. It had never happened.
So
That we know of.
There's a certain amount of assumption that they know who it is.
Right.
You have to assume that they knew it was Jesus because he didn't get in the boat with them.
Right.
How was he going to catch up to them?
Right. Exactly.
Also, at one point in Luke 22, starting in verse 31, where Jesus talked about his betrayal, or denial, denial. In verse 33, Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. That's just Peter.
That's Peter. Go with him to prison and to death. That's Peter. Very good. Gary?
Well,
Which he did.
just a general
Yeah.
statement, we've got to speculate about a good deal of this.
Right.
And sometimes that gets us in trouble.
It does.
But that's all right. I don't know if it's all right to get in trouble, but that's.
Let's just assume it is.
Yeah. Thinking about what had happened and why, what are you hoping to gain? When they left the other side, Christ told them to go without him.
They did. They sure did. Good point.
So
So he could go pray.
that's right. So they left without him. And here it is, 3 a.m. There's a very turbulent time in the water. They can be worried about it.
Sure.
And so when they see this person, you can see, or this image, you can see why they would be scared. We talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, Peter being impetuous as he was, you think, that might be the Lord.
Right.
we're trying to figure out where he is.
Exactly.
So again, speculation,
Right.
but I think maybe the fact that they were apprehensive about, he told them to go and they went, they didn't even know how they were going to get across.
Exactly. That's true. And see that, and that is another point. So like you said, they did go on, I mean, they did go on their own, right? And he comes behind, so they didn't, I wonder how much thought they did give to how was he going to get there. Did they think he was going to walk on water to them? Probably not. I mean, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, Gary. I mean, did they give thought ahead of time of how he would get to them? Because you got to get there somehow. He's got to make the cross somehow, right? That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Take another boat, okay. Take another boat, okay. It's funny when you start reading into these things and you start looking at the details of each verse and just like the 3 miles and stuff, it really your mind will start thinking about, okay, well, what about this? What about that? And some of it's just pure speculation on our part. And I made the comment to Elisha, I said, well, maybe it's not really relevant, but maybe it is because God put those words in there for a reason, right? That was his words. What's the thing? Adam.
Everything that Jesus did was designed to build these 12 witnesses of faith.
True.
Everything he did. Healing others.
Sure.
Still, you are my eyewitnesses. You will go before me. So everything that happened throughout the scripture, the gospel, points to him building their faith. And then in Matthew 17, John 17, I taught them, I told them about you, they know about you. So this is just another one of those examples of building their faith. Especially when you get to the other time when Jesus was in the boat and he sleep and
Exactly.
the waves begin to roar.
Right.
And again,
Same thing.
where is your faith?
Right, exactly.
It's building faith for those men that were with him.
That's a good point, Adam. And you talk about that other incident. Yeah, and at that point, they were scared too, weren't they? With him right. And this time with him right with them. In the boat. And he's right with them. And they still are scared. So, good. Appreciate the comments on that. Let's move on to the next one. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Okay. So Peter knew what Jesus sounded like, right? He knew his voice. So why did he doubt it was even Jesus? Jesus said, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. So why did Peter doubt? Like, we all have a unique voice, and we hear each other enough where you can pretty well tell, well, that's so-and-so talking, or that's whoever. Because, even our family members, and they spent a lot of time with Jesus, didn't they? So Peter had to know what his voice sounded like. So why did Peter doubt it was Jesus, even after hearing his voice? I saw a couple hands. Yes?
He probably found it hard to believe his eyes and his ears. You see someone standing on top of water. You're like, is that you?
Is that possible? Right.
Yeah, because you're like, am I hearing things?
And again, that kind of goes back to, I wonder how far apart they were. There was a storm. So so that's a good point. Actually, that could impede. Maybe.
As you said earlier, they knew that they left Jesus on the shore.
Right.
And he had gone up to the mountain to pray. So after all of this, they were, as you said earlier, wondering, how is he going to get to meet us on the other side? So when they see something, you do question, what is it? How did you get here that fast? How long did you pray? And how did you get from there to here?
Right.
Because 3 miles is a good distance to say they had rowed out and he's coming out that far.
Exactly. And it's over in John.
He had to be as close to them as I am to you.
Well, that's right.
You know,
Exactly. Because they weren't able to hear, right? So it had to be at least a reasonable, even if somebody's hard of hearing, at least a reasonable distance. And the one thing we do know, I guess it is from the Gospel of John that they rowed the boat for about 3 to 3.5 miles. That's where that reference is over in John. So 3 to 3.5 miles from shore, that's a long way. That's a long way, especially when we're rowing a boat. And a storm going on, right. So, I mean, you know, our minds can't even comprehend that. So, so I guess the points here are all these points are point towards, you know, it's been a long day, and then things are happening that they just can't believe. I mean, what in the world is going on here? You know, we see things, well, gosh, I've never seen that before. Well, you know, you can't even imagine what it would be like standing on the water and seeing somebody walking to you and talking to you. So why did Peter doubt it was Jesus? Well, we've got some different thoughts here that are good. I think it's just a combination of everything. But he did doubt, didn't he? He doubted it was Jesus even after hearing his voice.
Certain.
He was hurt.
Uncertain.
Oh, uncertain. Exactly. He just was unsure. It's one of the things we talked about this morning. Some of our fears are uncertainty about things, right? Good, Brittany. Thank you.
A lot of things.
He did. Doubting Peter. That's why I put that up there. So, you know, we talk about doubting Thomas, but yes, he did, JW. He sure did. He really did. Other thoughts on that question?
One thing.
Yes.
It could be more than one if you choose for it to be, but it is a thought. You say, take courage, don't be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, was he talking about being afraid of Christ's ability to get to him and walk? Or was he talking about being afraid of the storm? Or was he talking about both?
All the above.
So what he apparently was lacking is courage. And that's the same thing he lacked when he denied him 3 times.
Exactly. He did.
Not coming down on Peter,
No, I know.
but it's the same thing.
Right.
He denied because he was afraid.
True. But Peter had gone. Peter had taken that first step. He was the only one that did, right? Now, it may be because he was the first one. The other one said, well, we're just...
Things solid under you.
Exactly. Yes. I know. Exactly. But yeah, that's a good point. I thought I saw a hand or two go up another. Good. Good stuff. Good discussions. All right. Jesus said, come. So he stepped out of the boat onto the water, saw the wind, and began to sink. Okay. Question. Why did he begin to sink? Was it the wind? Was it the wind? Okay, let's take the wind out of it. Beautiful night. You can see the moon shining bright. I'm not altering what the scripture's saying. This is a what if. Beautiful night. There's no wind. Jesus is out there. And he tells Peter to come. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, let's take the wind out of it. Would Peter have still sank?
Peter put himself into it. Look what I'm doing.
Okay.
And as I think Bob said earlier, when he took his eyes off Christ, that's the same thing for us today. We can do things if we keep our eyes on the prize, which is Christ. But when he saw what he was doing, and I guess he looked around at the others and said, ooh, I'm walking on water too. And bingo, down he goes.
Right. Exactly.
That's what happens to all of us. We're doing things, and then your pride steps in, and all of a sudden it's over.
Right. Good. All right, well, let's put the wind back into it. Was seeing the wind the reason that Peter sank? Or were there other reasons?
Took his eyes off Christ.
Took his eyes off Christ.
And besides, you don't see wind.
No, but that's what it says. It says seeing the wind. So I guess you hear it and see it. I guess it's
Well, literally, you would see the wave.
Right. Right. Exactly. So the weight, yeah. Exactly.
And the wind might have the same effect on me.
Right. Exactly. Brittany.
He was not focusing on what was ahead of him.
He was not focusing on what was ahead of him. Exactly. Jeff.
It says that he was afraid.
He was afraid.
So he had fear.
Right. So was he afraid because of the wind?
Well, that's what it says. He saw the wind and he was afraid.
Right.
He was afraid for his life,
Pray for his life.
for getting hurt. That's why we always, a lot of times, why we fear. We're fearing death, dismemberment,
Right.
being hurt in some way.
Right.
But that's a lack of faith, because he should trust God to get him out of this, for Jesus to get him out of this situation.
Exactly, and that was one of the points this morning. One of our fears, the last one I think I had up there, was a fear of bad things happening to us, right? Whether it be illness, death, or losing a job, or just whatever. Others. We're actually going to get to a little bit more. I saw a hint. Ariel.
My daughter can't pedal her bike without looking down at her feet, so she forgets to steer and runs into something. So.
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
Or just looking down at your feet, wondering if you're actually stepping on something.
Oh, yeah.
You know, she sits there and pedals and looks at her feet the whole time. She forgets to.
So she's not looking ahead, she's looking down.
And then she runs into something, and then
That's a good point.
you're looking at your feet to see what you're doing, and then by the time you look up,
Right.
it's too late.
It's too late. You've already run into something, haven't you, by that time? That's a good point, Errol. I like that. Thomas.
Earlier in Matthew, when they're all in the boat together and there's a storm and Jesus calms the storm.
Right.
It was Peter there with that. He already knew what Jesus could do, and that's why he stepped out.
Okay. Good point. Good point. So that had already happened before this incident. True. Hadn't thought about that. Bill.
Isn't this when Peter actually began to dash? When he was in the boat, he saw Jesus. He knows he can't walk on water, but he knows if Jesus tells him to walk on water, he can.
Right.
And so he did. But when he looked around and began to doubt, I've always thought that's when Peter started doubting, is once he got to Jesus and then began to wonder if he could do this. You know, now he's looking around at the storm. Now he's beginning to doubt. Now he's beginning to sink.
And he starts to sink.
Yeah, but his faith got him out of the boat.
Oh, for sure.
But it didn't keep him on top of it.
But it didn't keep him up, right? It goes back to what Bob was saying earlier. We just keep our eyes focused on him and not the surroundings, then we are able to walk towards him, right? Alan.
Just what you just said. So to answer your question, did the wind make a difference? It probably did, because that's what caused him to be distracted.
Right.
If it had been calm, maybe he would not have, right? Because
True.
it may not have been anything distracted. What Bill just said, it's when he kind of got out there and looked around. If it had been nice and calm, would he have? I don't know. I don't really know, but I can see if it was the distraction, as Bob was saying, that really caused the problem.
Right.
No wind, it might not have been a distraction. So.
Exactly. Exactly. Good stuff. Good stuff. Any other thoughts on that one? Yes.
And I think it was Adam that already mentioned this with the previous storm. Jesus does a complete role reversal. The first storm, he just ends. He just stops it.
That's right. He did stop it on his own.
And on this one, he doesn't stop it. He doesn't end it. He knows, what the wind's going to do. He knows what's going to happen. And to Adam's point, everything is in preparation for Peter and the rest of them. Jesus isn't always going to be there physically. He's not always going to be there.
Right.
And we've got to get your faith up to speed to be able to withstand the storms that are coming, because the storm isn't always going to be turned off. You're just going to have to walk through it. You're going to have to just make it through. The similarity, the parallel in both of them is I'm there. Either I'm in the boat with you or I'm walking in the storm, but either way, I'm there. That's why the most important part of what Jesus says in that statement is encourage or not be afraid. He says, it's me.
Right.
I'm here. And that's the parallel. But I find it fascinating. He doesn't turn the storm off.
No, he didn't. Until they got back in the boat, right?
Get back.
Now, did he turn it off or did it subside on its own? We don't know that. I don't guess it matters.
The assumption is that he did it.
Yeah, exactly.
He did it because
right.
they worshiped.
Because it said the wind subsided, right?
Yeah.
Once they got into the boat.
But, I mean, he knows, Peter, you're going to have to learn to deal with wind.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point. You're going to have to learn to contend with it.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to learn to contend with things going against you.
Right.
And the way you contend with them is what Bob said, you stay.
Right.
You stay focused.
Very good stuff there. Good stuff. Thank you for that. Adam?
I think we forget everything that Christ does to the teaching moment. And it's designed for all of us, to grow our faith in him and our trust and confidence in God. We forget Matthew 10, 4 chapters prior to that, where Jesus gives them authority and power to go out and trample over scorpions and things and heal. They have limited power that God has already given them.
Right.
And yet they still have this doubt in their mind. That lack of faith is hard for people to overcome no matter what situation you find yourself in, no matter how strong you may think you are in faith as a Christian. Yet we have to overcome that. Why did you doubt, Peter? You are little feet of faith.
Little faith.
What's it going to take to make your faith grow and trust in God?
And Jesus tells us, if we have faith as small as a mustard seed, how small is that? It's all.
Look how small Peter's faith is.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody have a hand up over here? Okay, great. Couple more points. I don't want to run too long. I told y'all this morning I like to talk, so I'm like to hear other people talk too tonight. So. All right. Okay. We'll get to that point. You have little faith. Why did you doubt? Which Adam touched on. We all have. At what point did Peter stop doubting and have faith that Jesus would save him? Okay. Well, I mean, the question is pretty straightforward, but at what point did he actually change? You know, he was sinking, wasn't he? He was sinking, and he was going to drown. At what point did he actually have the faith enough to believe 100% that Jesus would save him? Okay.
While he was in the boat before he ever got out.
Okay.
He felt confident.
He did, because he actually did step out.
And he did, so that was the stop.
All right, well, that's the first one. How about the second? Doris?
When he was drowning, and he said, Lord, save me.
Lord, save me.
There was no other hope.
Okay. Thomas?
When he put his eyes back on Jesus, and
Okay.
his hand.
Okay, so his eyes were on the wind, right? And he went, well, what Bob was saying. So he took his eyes off the wind back on Jesus. Suzanne?
I think it's reassuring to know that somebody that had enough faith, like Peter had, to step out of the boat.
To even step out, exactly.
A man like that can, look around and in his circumstances, kind of lose it and be scared. And that kind of gives me hope, because there's times when, as much faith or as much trust as I think I have, there's times when, you just kind of forget that God's there.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. It doesn't mean all is lost.
Well, I think it's normal.
Because you do remember then that, oh, that's right, he is here, and he can save me.
And I mean, if Peter had his doubts, then...
Right. And we don't really know if Peter had 100% faith when he started to drown. And I don't know that Jesus required him to have 100% faith. When he said, help me, he was like, I need some help.
Yeah.
Whether or not God was going to help him, he asked for help, and he got it. So was that 90% faith, 60% faith? It was some faith. But was it 100%? It doesn't matter.
And you bring up a good point about, let's just think about drowning, for instance. Some people can swim better than others. I've been in a situation before in the ocean where there are some of us that don't get in the ocean that I know over on this side. I don't get in there far much anymore, but when you get, you can get out there in the way, especially, what's it called? Rip current. You get in a rip current. I've never been in one of those, but close, where you feel a little bit out of control, and it starts to take you a certain way, and well, it's a scary feeling, right? It is. So, I mean, you can kind of relate to what Peter was thinking there. Others, yes.
I think Christ's words, maybe we'll look at that too, are absolutely key when he said, oh, you have little faith.
Little faith.
I said earlier, which I was wrong, he needed courage, because that word was used also. But Christ said he needed faith. And as it turns out, earlier in Matthew, in the 8th chapter, when Christ encountered a centurion, centurion came to him and said, look, I've got somebody that's deathly ill in my home. Would you help me? The centurion.
Right.
And Christ said, well, I'll come. And the centurion said, I don't deserve you to have you under my roof.
Right. He felt unworthy.
He said, you just say the word, and he'll be healed. Man, that's faith.
You ain't kidding, it is.
And Christ
Big
said,
time.
I've not seen anything like that in all of Israel.
Yeah,
That much faith.
right, exactly.
So, and not putting Peter down, but he just didn't have.
He didn't have it.
Certainly the amount of, if you want to substitute the word trust, you might, but faith that Christ could do what he could do.
Exactly. And I mean, Jesus' words are pretty harsh. I mean, he says, you have little faith. I mean, that's pretty much telling Peter, you don't have any faith. Why did you doubt me? Right, Bob?
Well, in verse 28, Peter answered, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He used the word command, assuming that's been properly translated. That's a command.
Right.
And he said, and so Christ replied and said, come. So Peter got out of the boat. To answer that question I just had up there a minute ago, when did it happen?
Right.
When he received this command to come out of the boat.
Yeah.
He
Exactly.
responded to that command. Sometimes we have struggles in our life when Jesus would say, come, and we wrestle with it.
Exactly. Yeah, we're hesitant. We are. One more, and then we got to proceed.
I want to come back to this question of quantifying how much faith. Because I know that I only need faith as much as a mustard seed, and I can move a mountain.
Right.
So is it the quantity of my faith that needs to be measured, or is it the quality of my faith that is important? Or is it just that I have faith? I don't know. I mean, these are just questions.
No, that's a good question. Probably for another time, but oh, I know. I mean, that much faith will allow you to move on. Yeah.
How do you reconcile that?
Right. No, that's a good question, and that would be a subject that's talk about deep. But no, that's a good one. Appreciate it. All right, let's move on. We don't want to ruin too much time here. A couple more items I want to touch on. From a personal standpoint, would we be the type that ventured out, as Peter did, or would we tend to remain in the boat as the disciples did? Why or why not? Now, that is a loaded question, isn't it? And you can't answer that. I mean, you can't answer that in 5 or 10 minutes and we go around. You can't do that. I just threw that out there just for us to think on. Look, it takes all kinds, right? In this case, we had Peter. He did go out. The disciples did not go out. Who knows, they may have. But again, just think on that. Are we the kind that would want to take that first step and go towards Christ or not? Are we kind of, well, maybe not. Maybe there's too much to lose. Adam.
I'm going to use a practical example.
Okay.
I served in the military, and in the military, you're under authority.
Right.
And when that captain, lieutenant, or colonel instructs you to do something and put your life at risk, you don't question him. You're under authority. You go do what they tell you to do.
Yeah, with that, yeah.
You have been trained, you've been taught all the proper procedures. As Christians, we're in the same context. We are under authority.
Good point.
And so when we are instructed, go out and do, we have faith and confidence that God is sending us to do the right thing, regardless of the circumstances we find ourselves in. So it's all about being under authority. We are under authority of Jesus Christ.
Right.
And he gives us our marching orders.
Exactly.
Just like that centurion said, I'm under authority. Nero gave you instructions.
Right.
You said it will get done.
Right. And to go along with what Adam's saying, I mean, this is our authority, right? I mean, Jesus' authority is spelled out right here. And, you know, we have parents that tell us to do whatever we want to do. I mean, they are our authority. Now, we may not like what they say, but we know that it's best that we do what they say, and most times we don't have a choice to do what they say, right? So it kind of goes along with this. Kind of goes along with those same lines. All right. Anyway, just think on that, and we need to wrap it up. What exactly are we afraid of? We touched a little bit on that, on a few of the things that people are afraid of this morning that are kind of personal, like the snake spider stuff and heights and stuff. And then we went into the last point. What I want to touch on just a second was something bad happening to us, which has been elevated during the last year and a half because of the virus. But again, if it's not the virus, it's going to be something else. It's always something that's going to give us some fears. But God will ease those fears. It's easier said than done. I understand that. But boy, when you can keep your eyes focused on Him, out on the water, walking to Him, and not get sidetracked by the wind and other things, it just makes a big difference. It really does. Kind of go on the same. Are we willing to take that leap of faith? Why or why not? I do want to put this up there again. This quote that I read this morning. When you dare to leave the boat, you learn just how far God will reach to save you. If you don't leave the boat, or if you don't venture out a little bit, you just don't know. He's there. If you reach out, He's there. Listen, I appreciate everybody's attention and comments. Putting up with me this morning and this evening, and enjoyed all the discussion. Always do. So let's end with a prayer. Our Father, thank you so much for this Lord's Day you've given us to be together and to worship you this morning, to talk about you and your Word and Jesus, and how important it is to keep our eyes focused on Him. Thank you for the family here. Such a loving family. We thank you for your wisdom in setting up the church family. Please give us wisdom, strength, and courage as we go out into the world. Thank you so much for Jesus and the blood that He shed for all of us. We pray in His name. Amen.